Happy opening day. Fortunately, not the happiest of opening days because the Brewers not coming away with a victory in New York on day one of the 2025 regular season. But real baseball is back nonetheless, and we're going to break it all down for you. This is the Brewer Fanatic podcast with Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis. Spencer, how did you spend your opening day? And was it enjoyable? Somewhat, at least.
Well, I spent it at work, so not the most enjoyable day ever, but um, I was able to watch it with permission to watch it, so that was nice. Just had it on next to me the whole game, and yeah, I got to pay pretty close attention to it, more than I usually would during a day game. So it was good to just get back into the season and get to see a game, like you said, real baseball back, and yeah, I obviously would have preferred a different outcome, but it is also 1 out of 162, so I think I'll live with the result we got on day 1 and just kinda prepare for the rest of the season. But I'm excited to talk about day 1 and talk about some of the opening day stuff that we have just in general on the roster and everything else. So, yeah, overall, a pretty good opening day.
Before we dive into the actual game action, which we will recap, we're going to quickly just go over the actual opening day roster that the Brewers ended up taking into New York with them because that was something that was still in flux the last time that we did an episode. So I don't think there's anything especially surprising here, but the two things that we'll lead off with were, I guess, really the only ones that not shocking, but I was not expecting these couple moves to be the way that they went. So oddly enough, we had said this on last Thursday night when we recorded in the first set of moves, which we knew was coming soon because Pat Murphy kind of hinted at as much. Those moves came on Friday night, so a few hours after we dropped that show. But the Brewers traded Mark Canha to the Royals because they were not going to roster him. And then they optioned Caleb Durbin to AAA Nashville, which meant that Jake Bauers and Isaac Collins got the last two spots on that bench. Brewer Hicklin was DFA'd to clear space on the 40-man roster for Bauers, who needed to be added back because he was on a non-roster deal. But we had both said that Canha and Durbin were probably going to make it and that, maybe they would be able to hang on to Bauers as minor league depth. Maybe he would either be okay with not opting out, or maybe he would be in a spot where, yes, he got cut loose, but maybe the opportunities weren't there for him, and he would be okay with re-upping on a new minor league deal, something along that sorts. But what ended up happening was Jake Bauers exercised the upward mobility clause in his contract, which basically gives him the opportunity to, number one, say to the Brewers, okay, you need to put me on your 40-man roster. If you can't commit to that right now, I have the ability to go out and basically pitch my services to every other big league team. And if one of those teams says, yes, we will roster you, the Brewers would have needed to grant him his unconditional release so that he could pursue that opportunity. Or if they didn't have a definitive answer for him and then he went out and got an answer from another team, the only way for the Brewers to keep him would have been for the Brewers to add him to their roster, which is, we don't know if he was able to find another opportunity, but we do know that the Brewers ended up putting him on their active roster. But we'll talk really quickly about Mark Canha and Caleb Durbin. Canha, I'm guessing that this probably just came down to they were probably not super thrilled with what they saw of him in camp. We had touched on it briefly about how he only had 2 hits in spring training, but it's spring training. I wasn't really concerned. He was still drawing the walks, still took a hit by pitch. So the things that he's good at, those are still showing up at least somewhat in spring training. And he's also just been a guy who, if you go back and look at his numbers for like the last 4 years, he has not hit well at all in spring training. And he always ended up doing fine in the regular season. So that didn't really worry me a whole lot. But for one reason or another, the Brewers decided that they just had not either seen enough or been in a spot roster construction wise, whatever it was, they did not feel that they could guarantee Mark Canha a spot on the 40-man roster. So they traded him, tried to do right by the player, and sent him to another team who would give him a roster spot in Kansas City, and another team that is also out of the division, which is probably also something to think of here as well. Just ensuring that he wasn't going to catch on with somebody who they're going to be playing multiple times throughout the year. or someone who's in direct competition for them or with them for a playoff spot. So that's something that they probably thought about as well. And then Caleb Durbin, I think that this is not what I was expecting because Pat Murphy had been talking him up all spring training. Once the Brewers optioned Andrew Monasterio, I was thinking, okay, I feel like they're going to want to have another infielder on the bench. And the thing with Isaac Collins, and really the reason that I wasn't necessarily considering Isaac Collins was, yes, he's got the switch hitter thing going for him, which does help quite a bit. But Isaac Collins did not play a single inning of infield in spring training, so it really didn't seem to me like they were actually thinking of him as an option there anymore, and maybe they aren't, in which case you're now looking at Vinny Capra as your only bench infielder, and with the current situation with Bryce Terang's throwing shoulder, that seems to me like you're getting a little bit dicey on the infield depth there in my mind with how they have this lined up right now, unless you do think Collins can go back up, onto the infield in a pinch maybe, but still. That said, in terms of actual performance and development for Caleb Durbin, this was the right call. He did need to go back down to AAA. The bat was, in my mind, kind of what I expected. Like, he did get off to a slow start, but the results kind of started turning in his favor a little bit toward the end. And if you look at the spring training slash, it's not remarkable in any way, really good or bad. And that's not really what it was about for me. It's about the defense, though. I think the Brewers want him to be a big part of that third base mix this year, and I wouldn't be shocked if they were already expecting him to be. He looked very, very bad over there in spring training, and, I'd kinda heard the rumblings about it, and then once I got down to camp and actually watched him play third base in person, it was very bad. Like, he did not look like he could read the baseball from that side of the infield. The first step was terrible. He really just looked like he had no instinct or any idea what he was doing over there for a good chunk of the time. So, the Brewers, being the defensively minded team that they are, were probably just not going to be in a spot where they could feel comfortable giving Caleb Durbin as much playing time as they wanted to. So they ended up sending him down to Nashville. My guess is he's going to bounce around the infield quite a bit, play a couple different spots. But I think one of the things they're really going to need to see is, can you actually handle third base at even a competent level in the big leagues? Because that's not where he was in spring training. So I really think that the glove is kind of what the deal breaker was here, so to speak, because this was a guy who, going in, I think everybody would have expected that he was going to be on the roster because, again, it's the skill set that Pat Murphy likes. It fits in with a lot of what the Brewers do, but the glove was just not good over there, and that was surprising to me, especially the way you heard him described as an athlete and as a player. Just to all of a sudden actually see him over at third base, and he did not look remotely like a third baseman or even like an infielder when he was playing third base. It was kind of jarring to me because I know the angles are different. I know the reads are different, but to see him and to see him look okay at second base too, like he the last within the last few games of spring training, he went back over to second base and he actually made a couple nice plays where he showed off a little bit of range. So to see that contrast of just he looks perfectly fine at second base and then looks like he has no idea what he's doing at third. I know they're different positions, but I mean, we are still talking about playing the infield here. There's a lot of just instinctual things that should be able to translate decently to playing even on that other side of the infield, but obviously it's not where it needs to be, and it's going to have to get better before he comes back.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say on that is that I think the two spots up the middle are a lot easier to interchange than up the middle moving to a corner. The way you're reading stuff in the infield, if you're up the middle, you can kind of read an early swing and say, okay, I know that's going to my backhand for a right-handed hitter. Or you can read a late swing and say, okay, I know I'm going to my forehand on this. An early swing when you're at third base can still take you to the left. So it's just a different read in terms of like how you're, to me as an infielder, I wasn't reading the ball off the bat as much as I was trying to read the swing. And then you have to react to the ball off the bat. But that first step is normally coming like as the ball's getting hit because you're reading like, oh, he's out in front of this or he's slightly behind this. And you kind of can tell where the ball is going to go. Obviously, an early swing, once in a while, ball gets capped and it goes the opposite way, but you still have time to react to that because that's not going to come off the bat hard. I think having played all three spots in college, it is a bigger adjustment to move to a corner for me. But the thing is, Durbin had played some third base. This isn't like it was a brand new position to him. He had done it in the fall league a little bit. He had done it for the Yankees in the minors last year a little bit. So it is a little concerning that it was that bad. And like you said, I trust your opinion on it. We had heard about it even before you got down there. Like, it just didn't look right. And at second base, he looked fine. Like, he would be able to handle that just fine. So almost going all the way back to the conversation we had all offseason where it was like, well, and this is kind of out the window now with Terang's injury, but just like, would the best defensive mix be Durbin at second, Terang at short, and Ortiz at third? Like, if that came down to it in the future, would that make the most sense? But I think the Brewers, like we said all offseason, want Durbin to be the third baseman. They want Durbin and Dunn to play third. They want Ortiz at short and Terang at second, but it sounded like they wanted them at third either way. Like, Terang and Ortiz were the middle guys. It was just a matter of if they were short or second. So for me, I know you even said like you kind of expect them to bounce around the infield. When I look at the AAA likely roster, we'll find out tomorrow after this recording because they open up on Friday here. But what the roster projects to be, I'm guessing they're just going to play Durbin at third almost every day and just mainly put him there and say, okay, we're going to figure this out defensively right now. Like, this is your spot. You don't have to worry about other stuff. Let's figure out third base. Monasterio might play some second, some short because he's going to be down there. He played short in spring a decent amount towards the end. I think they were probably prepping him a little bit to handle that in AAA a little bit. I think Durbin's going to be mainly at third base to start this season. And I think it's a matter of once they feel comfortable with him defensively at third, we will see him in the big leagues. I don't think it'll be something, I don't think we're waiting on anything other than that, really. And then once they feel good enough, like, okay, he can handle this at, like you said, at least a serviceable, hold your own type of level, which for the Brewers is they look at a guy like that as a well below average defender, not a decent one because of how high their standards are defensively. But I think once he hits that point, we will see Durbin. Until then, I don't think we will, barring an injury, or maybe, Terang's shoulder flares up. Then maybe you see him and he's playing second. But for now, he's got to figure out the defense at third, and then he'll be a big leaguer. But it does kind of suck for him if you just think about the storyline here. Would have been his first major league game, opening day, playing at Yankee Stadium against the team that just traded him. So I'm sure that was a bit of a bummer for him when he didn't end up making the roster. But at the same time, he didn't show enough in spring to do it. So that's just kind of how it works out. But yeah, we will see Caleb Durbin at some point. I agree with you. And I think it's completely up to the defense at third base before we really will see him in any sort of like long-term capacity up here.
Couple of notes on the pitching side of the roster. Jose Quintana was optioned to AAA to continue building up. Chad Patrick was recalled to the roster. So kind of some odd construction right now. The Brewers have 4 length guys in that bullpen. Abner Uribe is also on the roster. He's serving his 4-game suspension right now. So basically, the way that this is all constructed is the Brewers only have 3 real starters on the roster right now, and that's Freddy Peralta, Nestor Cortez, and Aaron Savali. Then in the bullpen, they have 4 length guys. So they have Patrick, Tyler Alexander, Connor Thomas, and Elvin Rodriguez down there. And basically the way this is going to work for now is everybody's available at any given moment. And then once you get to those 4th and 5th games, they're going to kind of piece it together based on which of those length guys have not pitched yet, or which of them maybe only went like, maybe 1 inning. I mean, at this point, you're probably looking at just did they pitch like only 1 inning in game 2 of that Yankees series? Otherwise, if you get any closer
Yeah.
than that, they're probably not really going to be in the mix for any kind of length work once you get to that home opener and then that 5th game. But that's the way it's all shaking out right now. So Patrick is technically in the bullpen, but also probably an option to just start once we get into towards the middle and the back half of next week as well, with the Brewers coming home to face the Royals. But this was interesting to me. So really the kicker here is I can't remember if we talked about it on the podcast or not about the fact that they could option Quintana. I
You
can't remember if
mentioned
we
it.
went through
Yes,
it.
you did mention it.
We did. I did say it last week. So
Yeah.
and they did end up going this route, the only thing that gave me pause about whether they were actually going to do this is by sending him to AAA. He needs to be down there unless you call him back up to replace an injured list placement for 15 days minimum, which would be 3 more buildup starts, and he was making it sound like he'd only need 2 more at most. So that is extra time now that you're having to worry about. Of course, very possible that somebody goes on the injured list and they're able to just pop him right back up. But that is something that had to be part of the discussion. So I did a little bit of counting myself. And the way that this most likely lines up is if he, assuming he spends that entire 15 days down there and makes about 3 more buildup starts, then the earliest that they could bring him back is you're probably looking at starting one of the games in that Tigers series at home, and that series begins on April 14th. Now, there are a couple different ways that they could go about this. They could just give him 2 and alter his schedule a little bit so that they could bring him right back up on what would be day 16, then he could come up a little bit sooner. The way that I have the math on here right now is if he makes 3 starts down there and day 15 would be another start, that third start, because he said that he was going to be pitching on Thursday down in I believe he was going to stay back at the complex and do one more build up there on what was opening day for the Brewers in New York, and then he was going to maybe go out and do a couple rehab starts. Maybe the plan changed, but I believe that's what he told us when I was down there a few days ago. So if you put him on that schedule and then he's on the 15 days, like I said, that's 3 outings. And then if he does start on that final day, you got to wait a few more days before he's actually ready to come back. Or do you change the timeline a little bit, maybe add another day in there so that he gets 2 and then he can come back up right away as soon as the 2 are like you got to do kind of some little bit of different math on this. There's some different permutations that could make it happen. But basically you're looking at a time that either way, unless somebody gets hurt, he's you're not seeing him for at least 2 weeks here. So kind of an interesting way to go about it, but that is the route that the Brewers chose. So for now, they're just going to kind of have to piece things together on that pitching staff. You have a lot of guys who are kind of half stretched out. Going to be looking at some tandem starts probably in these first couple weeks here. The day off, obviously, after opening day helps things a little bit, especially early on. But Brewers are going to kind of have to figure out how to make this work. But hopefully, once Jose Quintana's back, everything's pretty much good to go. But that's pretty much all we have to talk about as far as roster news goes, unless you have anything else you want to add, any analysis relating to the way this is all kind of shaping up.
The only thing I'm thinking about now is the fact that they could option Uribe after his suspension and bring up another guy who can give length if they choose to do that. So maybe there ends up being another option or even somebody they want to make a true start at some point during this stretch. But yeah, for now, in that first time through, I think it's going to end up obviously game 4. They still won't have Uribe, so they're still going to have to figure things out that way. But you never know. Maybe game 5 they do have a plan for. It could be a Logan Henderson type. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could be something along those lines where they actually do have a bit of a plan in place to create an actual true start, rather than kind of going with whoever ends up being available after all of this. But yeah, I think they're going to have a lot of kind of coin toss decisions to make as they get to that point, and just kind of hope that, okay, we can get 4 or 5 good innings out of one of our length guys, and then, or like you said, maybe it's a tandem start where they're just trying to get one time through the order with 2 different guys or something along those lines. But it will be interesting to see. Obviously, once Quintana's back, it does kind of stabilize things a little bit, but until Myers is back, I think you might see that 5th spot be more in line with, like, all right, let's try and get Chad Patrick and Tyler Alexander to eat 6 innings together for us in this start, or something along those lines. So it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing. And like you said, even Quintana, there's 2 pretty different paths as to how they could attack this. I guess my personal guess would be that they would just have him 1 extra day of rest at some point, and then
Right. So
make
yeah,
that
so you're
first start
pushing
on
that
the
like that.
16th.
Yeah. So the third start is just his first start back, and it comes a day later. is how they would have to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm guessing they'll do. But like you said, they could go the other way too. And if they feel like he needs one more build up, they probably will. It might be a play it by ear situation, even for the Brewers, just to see how he's progressing. And if they feel good enough after the second, let's just add an extra day of rest and have it be the first day he's eligible to come back up, make his first start for the Brewers. So it's going to be super interesting to follow. I hopefully we get some, I don't even want to say surprise outings, but in a way, it'd be a little bit of a surprise to get some quality length out of these guys, but they can also, like we keep saying, just kind of patch it together with multiple guys to get you through a game too. And we've seen the Brewers do that. We've seen them do it even at this time of the year last year. They were already having to do this because Ross and Junis weren't really built up as starters. And um, yeah, it's something they're used to doing. They've done it before. They'll be able to make it work, but definitely going to be something to follow these the first full month, really.
The other wrinkle here too is Tobias Myers is not expected to miss much time. In fact, there's a world where he actually comes back right around the same time that Quintana does. He's already at a point where he's starting to progress a little bit. He can start that build up again pretty soon. So, the way that ended up playing out with the oblique, it was very minor. So Pat Murphy kind of did throw it out like, yeah, we could see him already once we get into the second half of April, which would put him again in a timeline where he's not missing much more time than Quintana. So
Right.
the way that injury affected him wasn't so much that it put him down. It was more so that it just meant he had to kind of reset the build up a little bit. And he could be back around that similar time frame. So kind of a lot of moving parts in that rotation right now. But that's just kind of the way things stack up currently. You got a lot of length guys who probably could make traditional starts. It wouldn't shock me especially if we get to that second time through and then they're really saying, okay, let's try to get more of a real start out of Alexander or Patrick or somebody like that. But a couple different ways
Hmm.
they can go about it. And we've seen the Brewers get through situations like this before too. So I think they're going to be okay for now. It's just a couple of weeks, hopefully, that they need to kind of worry about doing things this way. But that's how the opening day roster looked that the Brewers took into New York, where they fell 4-2 against the Yankees on opening day. Freddy Peralta getting the opening day start, and by and large, a very Freddy outing. 5 innings for him. Took 93 pitches to get through those 5 innings. So again, not efficient. But I think we've just kind of come to expect that that's how things are always going to be for him. So with that in
Yep.
mind, looking at the rest of the outing here, the only 2 runs that he gave up were on solo home runs in each of the first 2 innings, and, I think both of us are usually among the harshest critics of Freddie Peralta's performance. We do put him under the microscope quite a bit, but I really don't fault him that much for either of those 2 home runs because the first one was a leadoff home run by Austin Wells in the bottom of the first, and it was hit hard, but it was a low line drive that was only going to be a home run at Yankee Stadium. It just cleared that short porch and right. Like we're talking like barely got over the fence. There was actually watching that one, I thought maybe there was a chance that Frelick could get to it, but kind of just out of reach. But they publish like the graphics, the StatCast graphics where they give you the projected distance and they tell you where that would not have been a home run. That was a 1 out of 30. It was a unicorn home run.
Yep.
So anywhere else that is a well struck double off the wall as opposed to being a home run. And then the second one in the second inning was hit by Anthony Volpe. It was basically a decently struck pop up that got caught in the jet stream and it just kind of carried it out to right field. So he did give up a decent amount of loud contact on the fastball. So he did get away with some stuff there. But the actual 2 home runs he gave up, they don't really bother me much at all. We'll talk a little bit more about Freddie's performance. We'll kind of dissect it once we get into the loose ends and analysis and question section. It's all just kind of lumped together now. But we'll go through a little more stuff there because there are some things to dive into. Vinny
Hmm.
Capra hitting his first big league home run, and that accounted for the Brewers' first run at that point, bringing the game to 2-1. Rhys Hoskins drew a couple nice walks. And I mean, that's about it for good news for this game because
Yeah.
just about everybody else either hit poorly or played the field poorly. In Jackson Churrio's case, it was a little bit of both. 0 for 5 with 5 Ks, and then the Yankees putting up couple runs on Jared Koenig, and the latter of those runs coming in on a sac fly on a fairly shallow fly ball that
Yeah.
probably should be an automatic. Well, for starters, most guys aren't even going to tag on it. I believe it was Oswaldo Cabrera who went through a stop
Yeah.
sign at third base. He
Yes.
wasn't being told to
Yeah.
tag; he was being told to stay, and he actually went through it. And the only reason he was safe is because Churrio's throw was probably like 10 feet up the line. So not a great throw for him. He didn't really get behind the ball great, and then just kind of uncorked one up the line. But that one should be, if anyone, just if not everyone, maybe the most extreme speedsters, maybe an Ellie De La Cruz gets in there safely. But the vast majority of guys should be out dead to rights on that kind of play. There's really no reason why Cabrera should have scored on that. So a rough day for Churrio, kind of just worth reinforcing as we talk about spring training versus the regular season. You can be hot in spring and then come out and have a showing like this. This is also just how baseball works. Even the best hitters
Yeah.
are going to have rough days, but not a great day for him. Not really a great day for the Brewers on the whole. I think Carlos Rodon did actually throw the ball pretty well for New York, and I think that's something to acknowledge as well, but also just not the greatest of at-bats for a lot of these guys, really outside of Hoskins working a couple of nice plate appearances to draw those 2 walks, even if he didn't have 2 hits. But the Brewers could not find a barrel with anything all day. I did not look at the final numbers by the time we got to the end of the game, but I checked in the 7th, and they had, like, a 33% hard hit rate, like, 1 barrel, and it was
Yeah.
Capra's home run. Just not a lot going on here.
No, there was not. It was cool to see Capra step up and just continue the spring training power surge that we were all expecting as we headed into spring training, that Vinny Capra would discover some power. But no, that was a cool moment for him. And also give a little shout out to Lane Grindle on the radio call, giving Uke some love with the call, doing his classic get up, get out of here call for the homer. Cool moment for Capra, cool moment for Grindle to be able to kind of give him that love too. So that was one of the only highlights of this game, like you said. I do think Freddie pitched overall pretty well, and I won't dive into it. Like I said, like you said, we'll get into it more with a few of the questions we have. But overall, I was pretty pleased with how he ended up doing today, and there was some Yankee Stadium just involvement with the 2 homers. So um, overall, I do want to point out, like, those Rhys Hoskins walks were, it sounds almost sarcastic saying like, oh, he drew a couple nice walks and that's a highlight for the offense, but those were really, really good plate appearances, both of them. If the Brewers had been able to win this game, I would have pointed to those as huge turning points because they gave them some pretty nice opportunities. It put the Brewers in a good spot a couple of times. So he did a good job there. And then, yeah, Churio, he had like his Howie from Benchwarmers moment where the sun was just messing with him all day. I think like sun is bad. He could not, you could tell even in the first at bat that he was not picking anything up out of Rodon's hand. And then it almost seemed like he was so worried about it as he continued that things just kind of spiraled on him, which can happen to big league hitters and to any hitter. Um, and then even on the fly ball where he made the bad throw, you mentioned he struggled to get behind it. I think he was battling the sun on that fly ball, and that was why he couldn't like square it up and get to where he wanted to be. But even still, that wasn't that long of a throw, and being behind it or not, that throw should have been a lot more accurate than it was. I think you're being generous with 10 feet up the line. I would say it's probably closer to like 20 feet up the line. Like he missed by a lot, and the crazy part is he missed by that much. And if Contreras had happened to, and this is not Contreras' fault, I'm not blaming him for this, but if Contreras had happened to catch it in the line, like in the base run, in the runner's lane, he would have just been able to tag him because he would have been out by that much if the throw was on line. Like he would have been 20 feet from home when Contreras caught it if Churio had made an accurate throw. Um, so yeah, that ended up being somewhat of a big run too, just because it gave Devin Williams a little bit more breathing room. That extra run in the 9th inning ended up being a little bit. It gave him a lot of breathing room, and in reality, he would have had the tying run on third with 1 out, and instead it was on first. So big difference there. And yeah, it's it's a good reminder that while I expect Jackson Churio to have a very good season, and I think he's a great baseball player. This can happen to anybody on any given day in baseball. And I think Murph talked about it a little bit after the game, but just something to learn from. It's something he will learn from, and we've seen it from Churio in the minors and also last year. He does a good job of kind of learning from mistakes or learning from things that don't go his way. And I would be surprised if we see many more 5 strikeout games from Jackson Churio over the course of his career. But pretty tough way to start the season for the guy leading off and just not even really having competitive at bats. He did against Williams. I'll give him that one. But the first 4 were pretty quickly. He was pretty quickly put down on strikes. So yeah, hopefully not something we see much more of, something I don't think we'll see much more of, but definitely something that will catch the eye of a lot of fans, I'm sure, around the league when they see that line as they're looking through stats over the next couple days.
All right. Analysis time, nitty gritty stuff. We'll get into a little bit more of the smaller stuff from this game and some questions that you all had that relates to a lot of it. So the first thing we're going to talk about, we talked about how we're going to dive into Freddy Peralta's outing a little bit more. And really the story from this one is his changeup, because especially early on in the game, he was actually not getting like any good swings against the fastball. They were on it. Like, not only not whiffing, but drilling it, hitting it pretty hard. I talked about, yes, those batted balls should not have been home runs, but those batted balls were still drilled pretty good, and he got some hard hit lineouts and hard hit flyouts,
Yes.
and not a lot of swing and miss on it, especially early in the game. And even when all was said and done, still 6 whiffs out of 26 swings. That's a 23%. And again, it did tick up as the game went along, but still not quite what we're used to seeing from that Freddy Peralta fastball. But let's just talk about the changeup a little bit first. So he threw it 26% of the time in this game, and that's including that first inning where he really did not throw it a whole lot. And he ramped it up as the game continued going along after we got through that first. Like, we're talking over 30% in just about every inning. I think it went down a little bit in the 5th, his final inning. But that was really the pitch that was getting him all the good swings. 5 whiffs on that pitch. Compare that to 6 on the fastball. But he threw 24 changeups compared to 52 fastballs. So a 38% whiff rate on that pitch. And a little bit of a continuation of what we saw last year, where it did take on a little bit of a bigger role for him. So we saw it again in this start. And we'll just jump right into some of the questions here before we get into what we were going to talk about as far as that pitch is concerned. So Mason asked us, first of all, is Freddy Peralta's changeup new or different? So let's just look at the movement stuff right now. Not really. It was, yes, he broke off a couple of really good ones that I would say are probably better than
Mm-hmm.
some of the ones that we saw last year, but on the whole, averaging it out, not a whole lot different. Really, it took the step forward last year shape wise, and it really never became a huge story, but it was a thing that happened. Like, he added a couple more inches of like arm side fade on that pitch. So I think it's more just a continuation of what we saw last year. But the next thing I want to talk about is what Lucas asked us, and he asked, was Freddie's pitch mix today a sign of things to come for him, or just a matchup based tweaking of pitch usage? So he might be talking about not just the changeup, but also the fact that Freddie only threw 2 sliders. Otherwise, he was way more reliant on the curveball than we saw him at just about any point last year. I do think there's definitely an element here of he just needed to go with what was feeling good that day, what was comfortable, because Freddie is a guy who kind of has to feel a lot of things out. And I do think that's part of all the different adjustments we saw him make throughout last season. He's never been, I don't think, quite as consistent in any facet as some of the other pitchers that we've been spoiled by getting to watch over the last few years. Every pitcher needs to feel things out a little bit, but it does seem like in his case, he does kind of need to do that a little bit more on certain occasions. But I do think that was part of today, especially with the breaking ball. As far as the changeup goes, I think for today, that was probably, or Thursday, I should say. People are probably listening to this on Friday or over the weekend. But I think it's something that, whether it was necessarily seen on Thursday as the start of a long-term shift for him, I think that's what it's going to end up becoming. I think that's how it's going to play out. So we were talking about this before we recorded tonight about how I think that there's a decent chance that this is the year where we need to have a conversation about Freddie's changeup actually being his best pitch and no longer his fastball, or at the very least, it's going to kind of
Hmm.
catch up to his fastball as far as the role it plays and the kind of ripple effect it has on his arsenal. He's always going to throw way more fastballs than changeups. I'm not saying he's going to become a Devin Williams type deal here, but I think he's going to have to end up throwing the changeup more just because I think all things considered, it has a chance to start grading out as close to, if not his new best pitch. And kind of on a similar note, I think he's going to need it more to help the fastball continue to play. And this is where you kind of
Hmm.
came in and you were telling me about just your perspective on it, that Freddie's fastball is becoming less and less of an outlier in today's game. And I won't wade too much into your territory here. I'll give you a chance to kind of expound upon that. But basically, from my perspective, what I'm seeing is I'm just looking at last year when guys hit it better. I'm also looking at the fact that he's lost a little bit of extension. I was going to look at his league adjusted vertical approach angle too on that pitch, because if memory serves me, I think it has gotten like his vertical approach angle has gotten slightly worse over kind of year to year. But I'm also curious. I never had time to look it up before we jumped in here, but I'm curious what it is if you compare it to the rest of the league, because I'd be
Right.
willing to bet that the VAA on forcing fastballs across the league is going up every year. So if Freddie's either staying the same or actually getting a little bit worse, and the rest of the league is increasing, that means that compared to the league average, he's not going to be as much of an outlier anymore. And again, I'll kind of let you just talk a little bit more about what you're seeing with the fastball specifically. But for me, I think the changeup is going to start emerging this year as no, he actually needs to throw this quite a bit. And we did see a lot of right on right changeups today,
Hmm.
which we also saw him start doing last year. But that's why I'm also kind of like, I don't think this is a Yankee specific matchup thing. Like we saw him go a little more right on right changeup last year. We saw him doing it in this start. It wasn't a situation where it was like, well, the Yankees had a lot of lefties in there, some more changeups. That's pretty straightforward. I do think that it was kind of a combination of, yes, he just had a feel for that pitch because he wasn't throwing it a ton right out of the gates. He kept going to it more and more and more because I think, you're realizing, okay, it looks good so far. This is what you're getting the bad swings on. Let's keep dialing it up and make that adjustment in game. But I think it's going to get to a point where he's just going to have to pitch like this almost all the time now. And with that, I can kind of toss it off to you as far as what you're seeing with the fastball, what the changeup has to do with that. You can kind of take it away here a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah. First thing I'll touch on before I even get into the fastball specifically is that I do think today the changeup, and I think this is kind of what you're hinting at, him having the changeup as consistently as he did, and I think he commanded the changeup incredibly well today. Like he rarely missed his spot with that pitch today. It actually helped him. One, he was getting some whiffs on it. He was getting a lot of soft contact when they did put it in play. But it also helped him start hitting the bottom part of the zone with the fastball and getting takes
Hmm.
and called strikes for it, because that pitch tunnels a lot better at the bottom than it does at the top. And he can still always go to that high fastball when he wants to get, if he's going for a swing and miss. And he did get some whiffs at the top of the zone with it and above Cody Bellinger a couple of times specifically. And Bellinger is an interesting example of kind of what I want to get to with this eventually, is that Bellinger he doesn't have like the Garrett Mitchell hole at the top of the zone, but his swing path does allow for stuff to get there sometimes and pitchers to beat him up. But it is becoming less common for hitters to be able to get beat at the top of the zone on fastballs because they are starting to train for it more. And the reason they're training for it more is what you started hinting at. A lot more pitchers are trying to take this approach of this vertical approach angle around -4 in that area, or as close to that as you can get. And Freddie, when he first came up, he was a lot more of an outlier with the shape of the fastball. And like you said, part of that is that Freddie has, in terms of the vertical approach angle, regressed a little bit. But at the same time, I do think this is something where, and I same as you, I have not looked up the true numbers on this, But I do know that it's a trend in baseball, that this is more common. More pitchers are trying to do this. So, like you said, I would imagine as each season has progressed, Freddie is getting closer to that league average in terms of vertical approaching. Now, I would say he'd still be above average. He'd probably be on the higher end still. And the pitch does still grade out as a solid fastball. This isn't saying like the fastball's not a good pitch anymore. But at one point, it was pretty elite. Like it was a pretty special fastball. I don't think it falls into that category anymore. And the whiff numbers would kind of agree with that. Like he just does not get the same level of whiff on that pitch. I don't think that's coming back. I really don't. So being able to use the changeup and like I said, maybe that helps you get the fastball by people at the bottom of the zone or just catch the bottom of the zone, which I think I talked about it on here before, but a guy like Walker Buehler has always talked about how, because he has this, riding, carrying fastball and a reasonably similar vertical approach angle, but he likes to catch the bottom of the zone with it a decent amount because it's hard on hitters. They think it's going to go below the zone and then it just sneaks in right at the bottom. And if you're throwing the changeup off of that, that's where you can kind of make it play. Just to quickly touch on the breaking ball stuff, I think that was more of a today specific thing, like you touched on. I think that was he found a decent feel for the curveball. Maybe there was a little bit of a matchup thing involved with that. I don't know in that way, but we know he was trying to go more to the sweeper. And even the one slider or the couple sliders he did throw were actually not super sweeperish. Like it wasn't really the shape you would expect for somebody who was apparently going to more of a sweeper. So I almost wonder if it was just like a shorter curve that he didn't quite spin as well and it got labeled a slider because it wasn't the slider that we had heard he was working on, I guess is what I would say. But either way, I think that was more matchup dependent or field dependent on the specific game. But like you, I think the changeup's here to stay. And I do not disagree with you. I think there's a pretty good chance that by the end of this year, we're looking at the changeup as the pitch that is more of the driving force than the fastball for him. He's going to throw more fastballs than changeups. It's not going to be like Craig Yoho and Devin Williams where he's throwing more changeups than fastballs. But the changeup might be the thing that makes the whole repertoire tick rather than the fastball, which is how everything else used to be built around that. So it's going to be interesting. I think you may have seen some signs of a reinvented Freddie moving forward today. I don't want to say this is for sure, like you said, what we're going to see every time. And I do want to go back to the point that I don't think he will command it as well as he did every game because it was genuinely, I can't think of a time he really like badly placed a changeup. Even his misses were around where they were supposed to be. And he was just very consistently putting it where he wanted. So I don't think that will always be the case, but I do think this is going to be a very, very big part of his repertoire moving forward.
Mason asked us another question to kind of shift gears here a little bit to some other stuff from this game. He asked, Sal in the 5 hole is interesting to me. Is this Murph getting his guys in the lineup, or is this him saying we're taking the training wheels off? So I think the first thing to note here, and this is something I'd like to do a story on if I get the chance here this year, how the Brewers actually construct their lineups, like what's actually going into these decisions. Because I can guarantee you it's not Sal actually profiles as a number 5 hitter. Just kind of my educated guess here is this is a lot more about it just splitting up righties and lefties. Pat Murphy's talked before about how as a pitcher, it's generally more disruptive if you're constantly having to shift between facing a lefty and a righty, not even necessarily from a pure how does your stuff play against them standpoint, but more so in terms of where do you have space to miss.
Mm-hmm.
So even if like you're a left-handed pitcher like Rodon today, and you're when you're facing a righty, you have room to miss arm side. So fastball gets away from you, that's fine. You're not going to hit the guy because there's nobody there. Now all of a sudden you're in a spot though where you can't get used to having that luxury because of its left, right, left, right, left, right. You're kind of snapping back and forth a lot and constantly having to snap back and forth between different spots you're able to go to, different sequences you're able to use. I think I would not be surprised if the Brewers have crunched the numbers on this stuff and said there's actually more reliable if there is value in how we structure the lineup, there's more in that aspect than there is like the run producing potential of
Mhm.
someone other than Sal Frelick batting fifth. Because I mean, this is something that's been known for quite a while in the analytical sphere. Batting order throughout the course of a 162 game season, it actually does not swing your expected runs scored or your actual runs scored nearly as much as you would think. And a lot of that just has to do with it's a long season. Everybody is going to bat in a wide variety of different spots. It really doesn't matter that much. So I wonder if they're kind of looking at that being like, okay, here's how we're going to break this up a little bit. It was interesting to me that they went Sal in the 5 hole and not Garrett, but
Yep.
I think that's like the only thing you could maybe read into this a little bit. But I think either way, they it's not so much we're taking the training wheels off or we think Sal was ready to hit fifth. I think it's always just more about how do we find ways to get the pitcher out of a rhythm? And I almost wonder too if a little bit of that is also like just what kind of swings does this guy take too? Maybe that's kind of where Sal at 5 instead of Garrett comes in a little bit. Because if you have to go to Sal now after facing who is batting fourth today, Reese.
Yep.
Going from Sal to Reese is not only an entirely different bat handedness wise, but it's just way different ways you have to pitch those kinds of profiles, as opposed to if you're going from Reese to Garrett, where it's two guys who are probably going to be a little bit of bigger swingers, or they're going to be like super passive. Maybe you can get a pitch on the corner by them, and they're just not going to swing at it because they're okay with taking that strike and waiting for their pitch right down the middle that they know they can hit, because those are two guys who kind of approach hitting that way sometimes. Versus Sal is going to be a lot more, he's going to try to fight things off. And yes, he's got a good eye, but he's also, if you try to get that pitch on the corner, he might just take a stab at it late and just try to foul it off as opposed to taking that pitch.
Mhm.
So maybe just different kind of swings you might expect him to get. But if I'm just trying to think of this off the top of my head, and again, I'd like to get an answer for sure at some point on this, I think any decisions like these that we have seen and that we will continue to see probably have a lot more to do with things like that than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. It just one other thing that's kind of popped into my head. Really, since Murph took over, this is something that's kind of been prevalent. Because even last year, I think back to when Joey Ortiz was really hot and he was still batting like 8 or 9 every game. Um, and I think back to just other times he's had some pop at the bottom while he's kept a guy like Sal um or or honestly you could point to Ortiz at other times where they were hitting more in that like 5, 6 spot. I almost wonder if he likes to kind of reset the order and add a little bit of pop at the bottom of the order once in a while. And to me, you think about it, you don't want to get through 5 hitters in the Brewers order, and all of a sudden everybody that you expect to have any power is basically done. And now you're going Frelick, Ortiz. I mean, Capra obviously hit a homer today, but a guy like Capra and a guy like Terang, and now you're looking at only it's 4 guys who basically are going to be singles, maybe doubles, um, throughout that whole part of the order. I wonder if they like to try and split it up a little bit and say, okay, let's have somebody who could take a big swing and actually knock one out or gap one and score a couple of runs further down in the order, and also make the pitcher have to get to that part and say, okay, I still have a potential run producer in that spot. So, like you said, I don't think they base everything, or I don't think they base a lot of this off of like run producers in your standard, stereotypical run producing spots. But I do think they might be looking at it as in, okay, we do want to have somebody who could be a quote unquote run producer at the bottom of the order still, where we're not just getting to that point and they're looking at it like, okay, we can be aggressive here because these aren't guys who are going to take us deep. So I've got 4 hitters in a row that I can just attack. And if they single me to death, so be it. But I know I can just go right at these 4 and say, all right, here's my best stuff. Take your best shot, and you're probably not going to hit a homer here. This maybe breaks that up a little bit where you have somebody that can actually do some damage. So outside of what you said, that's the only other reason I can really come up with for Sal being 5 and Mitchell being 7. But yeah, otherwise, I think you're exactly right that and the space thing is something I'd never heard until Murph said it last year. but it makes a ton of sense to me once I did hear it, where it's like, okay, a pitcher has a rhythm, and we see it with our other job. Like, we see a pitcher can get into a point where like misses are in the same spot. They keep missing the same spot. So now if you miss that way for a lefty, but now a righty's in the box, like you said, that could hit a guy instead of it being something where it's like, oh, I missed. Who cares? I can just throw the next pitch. So I do love that thought process. It's something I never thought of before. And I will say that has been one of my favorite things about Murph is that even things I don't necessarily always agree on, he's made me think about a lot of things that I never really had thought about as a baseball fan. And I kind of pride myself on thinking about every single possibility that I could come up with as a player. Like, that was one of my advantages, was trying to be ahead of people in terms of like, what could I do on this play to make a play when maybe there isn't one normally and stuff like that. But this type of stuff, like, I think it's really cool. I think the thought process is really fun for it. And even if it's not perfect and I don't agree with everything all the time, I do like that he's a little outside of the box and always thinking of things that, and who knows, maybe this is something that's been common in MLB clubhouses and we just haven't had a manager who talked about it like this, but I'd never really heard of this from anybody, these types of some of these things. So I do enjoy that, and makes me think, makes it fun to kind of look at the lineup and go, okay, it's not just, Sal Frelick came up, and if I can remind everyone, was batting fourth for the first like couple of months of his career. Council kind of stuck him in the four spot, and that lineup was not good. So don't get me wrong, there weren't a ton of great options at that point, but yeah, it would be very interesting to find out exactly what the logic is behind that, because now I have just all these different possibilities running through my head. But yeah, I love the outside of the box thinking and some of the stuff he comes up with. I think it's kind of a fun change of pace, at least in terms of publicly knowing about it. So maybe my favorite thing about the Murph era so far.
Yeah, well, and the reason I kind of think that this isn't necessarily a Sal thing, so Sal in the 5 hole, Sal cleanup, that's been a thing. But like Tyler Black has come up for very brief pockets of time that
Yeah.
whenever he's been up here, he's batting cleanup. And I don't think that's necessarily because the Brewers see him as a stereotypical cleanup hitter, but I'd be willing to bet it has a lot to do with this same kind of stuff. So just kind of interesting things to look at when you're talking about stuff like that. Mason had one more follow up on Sal Frelick and talking about like platoons here, because Frelick's not a guy who the Brewers usually play the platoon game with. So his question is, what makes a hitter more likely to need to platoon? Is it hitter dependent? Is it pitcher dependent? I would say a lot of it probably just comes down to swing path stuff. I think that's part of it. I think to a certain extent, just your eye as well. My guess is there's just certain lefties who can pick up the lefty release point better than others. I think that's probably a big part of it too. But I mean, it's really just going to be process based stuff like that that tells me you got a better chance of staying on a pitch from a lefty than a lot of other guys do who hit from that same side.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is funny when you hear about a lot of the guys who are lefty hitters who hit lefty pitchers well. I feel like a lot of times I hear like, "Oh yeah, my dad was lefty, so I saw a lot of left-handed batting practice and stuff like that growing up." Like, I think there is an element of these certain people just had way more reps against lefties growing up, so they do see the ball better. But otherwise, I agree. I think in terms of what actually makes them platoon dependent, it is more in line with, yeah, we talk about like Keston Hira and how there was a hole in his swing, and it was a lot easier for lefties to attack it, even though that was a reverse platoon thing. It was easier for lefties to get to that spot and consistently put it there, so he struggled against them. I think that's the type of stuff that ends up mattering more than anything else. But when it comes to lefties specifically, I do think there's an advantage to people who have just seen them more, because they're less common, especially younger ages and growing up. Like, they're less and less common until you get to the big leagues. All of a sudden, every team is rostering, 3 or 4. Most teams have at least one starter, probably two. So you see them a lot more consistently, but really until then, you can avoid them a lot of times for a decently long stretch, and it's not that weird for that to happen. So some of it, I think, is rep induced, especially for lefty pitchers, but for the most part, I think it falls more in line with what you're talking about.
And it might just, I think a lot of it too is ability to get to certain spots in the strike zone that lefties can usually
Mhm.
exploit more when they have that left on left matchup. I think like in Frelick's case too, there's something to be said for the fact that he gets the bat through the zone. He doesn't swing hard, but he gets the bat through quickly because it's such a compact path, kind of like what I was talking about before with bat pass stuff. So I think there's still an aspect of, and the thing to remember with Sal too is it's not that he hits lefties well, it's that he just hits lefties and righties the same, which so far has been well below average. That's like another point to make here too. But I think with him, like he's not going to get beat more on if a lefty pounds him inside or tries to go away because number one, Sal's just very good at like waiting back and just picking the ball out of the catcher's mitt if you try to go away on him. Like I've talked to him about that and he said he feels super comfortable being able to do that. So I think that's something to think about as well. But even if you try to get inside on him, I think even if he doesn't pick that pitch up right away because he's so compact, he's got a chance to at least get to it and make like the same kind of contact he often does against the righty, which is not good contact, but it is contact. I think those are, and it's all dependent on who you're facing and a lot of times who the hitter is and just the mechanics of his swing. But I think in Sal's case specifically, he's just got a couple things about his build, about the way that he's able to cover the plate, about the way his bat comes through the strike zone. I think there's just a lot of things going on there that position him not to hit lefties well, but to fare about the same against lefties as he does against righties. So always an interesting question to kind of consider though, because I do think it's not always a black and white answer, but that's kind of what I think is going on in this specific instance. Now we have a matchup question that kind of piggybacks nicely off that a little bit. Dan asked us early season manager question: do you like the idea of giving Isaac Collins an at bat in a clutch situation, or would you prefer that go to Mitchell, lefty on lefty? So the context here is Isaac Collins pinch hit for Garrett Mitchell in the top of the sixth on opening day with the bases loaded. And at this point, the Yankees had gone to left-handed reliever Tim Hill.
Mhm.
Frelick was allowed to hit against Hill, which I think goes back to a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about. Mitchell is a lot different. Mitchell, there's more swing and miss there. But I think the other thing to think about here too is like Tim Hill is a massive ground ball pitcher and Garrett Mitchell's a massive
Yes.
ground ball hitter. Granted, Sal is too, but sometimes in Mitchell's case, okay, so ground balls are interesting because I think yes, it's better to hit hard ground balls than not, but sometimes in certain situations, you're actually better off hitting a soft ground ball because you got time to beat that out as opposed to hitting a hard ground ball right at somebody. You're not going to beat that out just because it gets to the fielder quicker. He doesn't have to go get it in the same way that he has to go get a little chopper that, like what Joey Ortiz did, a 23-mile-an-hour chopper that, you know, barely made it like a quarter of the way between the plate and third base. But I think in this situation, that's part of it. I also think Tim Hill is such a goofy arm slot. Like he's almost submarine. He's got like a negative 20
Mhm.
degree arm angle. I think they just thought Garrett would have a really tough time picking that up. They have generally shielded him from lefties a lot more than Sal because I was actually trying to look at splits to see if I had something to back this up, and I couldn't even do that because they've given him so little exposure to left-handed pitching so far. They started to do it a little bit more last year, but he missed so much of the year that we couldn't really build up a sample then either. But I think in this instance, it's really just it's not a great matchup for him. And the thing about Collins too is a switch hitter. He can hit from the right side. When you got a ground ball pitcher on the mound, Isaac Collins last year in the minor leagues only had like a 36% ground ball rate, so he was actually quite a bit better at least. And at least what that tells me too is like he can get to a spot bat path wise where maybe they
Mhm.
felt a little better about someone like Isaac Collins, his ability to get that contact off the ground, like to connect with that heavy sinker in a way that you could actually hit a line drive, as opposed to what they thought Mitchell would do. They might have thought either Mitchell was just going to not be able to pick up the ball and he'd strike out looking, which is what he did in his only previous at bat against Tim Hill. He struck out looking. He just took a bunch of pitches, and maybe that was because he just could not pick up the release point or pick up the slot or any of this stuff. But also the fact that if he goes up there and makes contacts and just pounds a ground ball right at someone, that's it. Maybe you send Collins up there thinking, okay, not only can he pick this up a little bit better, he might also have a better chance of making a productive kind of contact here as well. So I didn't mind the move at all. I don't think it's ideal when Isaac Collins is your alternative, but I do think that even without having a lot of numbers to go off of, I think that there's almost certainly some pretty valid rationale for thinking that Collins had a better shot at a productive at bat there in that specific situation, that specific matchup.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think you look at a guy coming from that arm slot, and Tim Hill has always been, he was at one time basically just a lefty specialist. That obviously is kind of extinct in today's game, but at that point, that's what he did. Now he has gotten to a point, especially with the Yankees after leaving the White Sox last year and going to the Yankees. Um, he did a pretty good job against righties and lefties, but I do think, like you said, Collins just has a better profile in terms of somebody who could actually do something against him in that spot. And I know this is a process-based question, but I just do want to look at the at-bat a little bit. It is very unfortunate that Marvin Hudson decided that 2 of the first 3 pitches were strikes when they were very clearly not. Um, that that would have been a very different situation for Collins had he not had 2 pitches that were multiple inches off of the plate called strikes against him to start the at-bat. So, eh, as somebody who I do like Isaac Collins, especially offensively, I do actually think there's something there as someone who could be helpful in a pinch hitting type of role. I think this is that's a good spot to use him in. And I think there's plenty of logic behind it. And going back to the Frelick thing, I also think that was somewhat dependent on what was happening at that time too. Like when Mitchell came up, it was more of a do or die. We need to get a hit here or the inning ends type of situation, or reach base here or the inning ends situation. I believe there was only 1 out when Frelick came up too. So that changes things a little bit too. I think they were more in a spot where, like, okay, we can't afford to let Mitchell try and work through this here and see if he maybe figures something out against Tim Hill, even though it's game 1. Obviously, you can technically do that in game 1 and you'd be fine. But just in terms of this game, I think they wanted to go out and try and make something happen in that spot. So they went to Collins, and I think there's plenty of stuff that can back it up. Jack just ran through all of it. And um, I will use this quickly to touch on Collins just a little bit. I will go back. We had a question about a dark horse to make the roster. You had picked Capra, which once you explain that logic, I was fully on board with. And I picked Collins. So I'm happy that I got that right, even though
I
actually
think you
you had
deserve
talked.
more credit, so I'll give you that one.
I think you had actually talked me out of actually believing that would happen, but then it ended up happening. Perkins' injury probably played a role in that. I can't remember if that question was before Blake got hurt or not, but um, either way, I just really do think there's something there with the bat. And like you said, he's a switch hitter who last year hit well from both sides. He gets the ball in the air. My one concern with him is kind of passivity. I think he needs to swing a little more than he does. He took a ton of strikes in AAA, a lot of like a low in zone swing rate. He doesn't whiff, but he just doesn't swing on pitches in the zone a ton either. So that worries me that you could get into like what Oliver Dunn had happen to him at the big league level, which was pitchers just start firing strikes at you, and all of a sudden you're not really prepared for that. But I do think there's something here, and I don't know how I feel about him defensively in the outfield. I don't think it's great, but I think he can hold his own out there and be fine. It is kind of funny when you look at it though. That would have been a pretty perfect time for a Mark Canha pinch hitting opportunity, had he been on the roster. Like if you look at it, just it would have been exactly where you would have been like, oh yeah, this is great time to
Mhm.
get Mark Canha in. He might draw a walk. He's going to give a tough at bat against the lefty. So it is funny just how that worked out game 1. It was like, oh, that's probably how we could have used him. But um, like you said at the beginning, I think they probably just feel like Canha's not the same guy he was, and probably wasn't going to help a ton, but just kind of made me laugh because in that moment I was like, oh yeah, this Mark Canha would have been hitting right here if he had made the roster. But um, yeah, no, that's all I have. I rambled a little bit about him, but I had to get my Collins take off.
Last thing I want to talk about here before we jump into your minor league stuff. So Vinny Capra hitting his not only his first regular season home run of the year, his first big league home run of his career. And
hmm
he talked to us on the last day of spring training about the bat speed stuff he did, because he mentioned it at the beginning of camp. I wanted to follow up on it when we got down there. So when we were all talking to him about making the roster, I asked, like, can you go into a little more detail? What exactly did bat speed training entail for you? And I was expecting we were going to get kind of the normal answer of, well, I, trained with weighted bats, did stuff like that, because that's how a lot of guys build bat speed, because it's just your emphasis is, I need to get used to swinging harder somehow. So guys will swing a weighted bat, and then just builds more of that strength, more of the motion you need there to be whipping that bat through the zone harder. But Capra said that he actually did mostly mixed martial arts training, so like MMA style stuff, with a Chicago area trainer who he's worked with for a little bit now. He said the guy's been kind of like a mentor to him. But that was really what he focused on this offseason. So he talked about like how the stuff he was doing can relate to bat speed. He talked about just like explosive movements going away from him, which is what you're doing when you're swinging a baseball bat. It's explosive movement. You're coming through, and the bat's going away from your center of gravity. But, and he kind of admitted this a little bit towards the end of that conversation. That's not actually bat speed training. You're not really directly addressing bat speed. So I wrote it up the day after he talked about all this stuff, and I did include the quote from him where he was like, "Well, really, what just matters is I wanted to hit the ball harder. It doesn't necessarily need to be bat speed and have that be how I got there." He said, "I'm seeing that I'm hitting the ball harder, and that's what counts," which I would agree with. But it's funny to just see that he was mostly characterizing it as I worked on bat speed when he didn't actually really work directly on bat speed. What he worked on more so, the stuff he was talking about was really just building like explosive rotation from the ground up. And he talked about like using his legs a lot too, just all this stuff. So something that's going to be interesting to watch, because there's like no bat speed tracking for spring training. I believe they only had it at, was it at Peoria, or it might have been a different stadium? But there was like only one. I was looking through it. There's only one stadium that the Brewers played in the Cactus League out of all the StatCast stadiums they played at that actually has the bat tracking data. So it's literally like 4 Vinny Capra swings in spring training that we have access to. That doesn't really tell you anything. But those 4 swings, he was at like 68 miles an hour on almost all of them, and his home run swing was 68 miles an hour. His average bat speed in the very small sample of games he played with the Brewers last year, it was only like 3 games, was 70 miles an hour. So more signs that he's actually swinging the bat slower as opposed to adding bat speed. So what I think actually happened is I think his rotational ability got better. He's rotating better. He's got a better point of contact. The way the bat's coming through the zone is a lot better. It's not actually coming in harder. There's not more bat speed there. I think everything else got better, and that's where a little more of this power is coming from. But that is, it's still a distinction to make, because he said bat speed like all these different times
Right.
is kind of just his blanket term for what he was working on. When in reality, even if that was part of something, even if that was something he was thinking he could see as a result of the stuff he was doing, I think more so what he worked on was the effects that he's seeing from this is what I should say. Like the work that he did more directly addresses just, can he have like explosive rotation as he's swinging, as
Hmm.
he's coming through the zone? Can he have that stuff as opposed to swinging harder? So that's a distinction to make. So I wouldn't be shocked if as the season goes along here and we get more of this data, we actually find out it's not his bat speed that changed. It's maybe his swing path and his point of contact too. That's what I want to see too,
Yeah.
because now StatCast has started releasing more data on that kind of stuff as well. I think that's where, as we build up a sample here, we're actually going to see a difference, not an actual bat speed.
Right. Yeah. To me, it sounds more like when you build from the ground up, basically you're kind of improving the kinetic chain, the way your body moves and everything fires at the right time. And that's how you generate more rotational speed, like you said, or just better rotation, where you're leaking less power. That's a lot of what pitching and hitting is trying to leak as little power as you can before you fire. So if you're moving from the ground up with your movements, that's when everything's firing at the right time. So it's, it's hips and then it's shoulders and everything goes at the exact right time that it's supposed to fire. And that's how a guy like Rhys Hoskins has power despite not big bat speed, is that everything else
Mhm.
works in sync how it's supposed to work. And that allows him to catch the ball out in front, to have the ball hitting the bat at the right time in terms of like when he's generating the most power. That's what that all comes from. Yeah. So yeah, everything you're describing sounds more to me like that. Like it's a buildup of everything from the ground up, and everything's firing more in sync with how you want it to fire. So like you said, I think it's easy to describe. I'm sure he just viewed it as like, okay, I'll just describe it as bat speed, and that's how I'll get kind of done with these questions and be done talking
Mhm.
about it. But in reality, yeah, it was a lot more in line with like, let's rebuild the way I move. And it might not be faster, but it's a lot more efficient, and it's a lot more just powerful in my movements. So yeah, to me, I mean, like you said, I don't expect this to be something where we're still seeing a lot of power out of Vinny Capra, but
No.
it is cool to see it carry over into the first game. And I do think I feel pretty comfortable saying he has added some power, that he probably does have a little bit more power in him than he did before, but it's just not going to be something where you want to expect Vinny Capra to hit many more homers, no matter how much more he plays this year. Um, I don't think that'll be a huge part of his game, but it is always cool to see a guy just to figure some things out. And he played over 2,000 minor league games. I saw today on Twitter. So a guy to hit his first major league homer after all that, and to continue to work on himself and find new ways. I just always I love to see that type of stuff. And the Brewers are always a good place for those types of guys. It feels like they end up getting an opportunity a lot more often than in other places. And the Brewers like to give like, I'll be honest, for a year, I was saying I just don't get why we're not DFAing Vinny Capra every time we need a 40-man spot. And clearly the Brewers saw something he could probably rework some things, and they liked him defensively, and they're like, all right, if we can, if he can figure something out offensively, then we have a guy who can be a legitimately nice utility player. And I think that's in there right now. I think he could be that type of guy for this team. And no offense to Andrew Monasterio, but I do think the good version of Vinny Capra can be more helpful to this team than Monasterio can be, just because in part Capra can actually play shortstop, but also I just think defensively overall he's much better than Monasterio is. And then if he's got anything with the bat, and if we see just a solid-ish bat from him, that can be a valuable 25th, 26th man on the roster who just steps in and gets things done when you need it.
You brought up Hoskins, and I think that's probably a good name to throw in because with him, it's more about, like you said, it's not bad speed, it's bad acceleration. So
Yeah.
not necessarily, how hard it's coming in, but more so like how much explosiveness is he able to not leak, like you said, as he gets into his motion as he's coming through. And I think that's probably the better term for Capra. And maybe that's more what he was trying to say when he said bat speed, maybe thinking more about not swing speed, but swing acceleration.
Hmm.
Because I think that if you're going to try to narrow it down to like a number, that might be the one to watch a little more. And again, like as a product of that, are the contact points better, things like that. But yeah, I think that's more so what the process is like for him. Something to follow as we continue going here into the regular season. That's the last thing I really wanted to touch on, though, so we can send it off to your minor league sandbox. We got a Jesus Made update right away to lead this thing off, so I'm looking
Oh
forward
yeah.
to it. Take it away.
All right. We do have a Jesus Mate update right away. Kurt Hogue reported yesterday, Wednesday, that Jesus Mate has been assigned to low A, or he's been told he's going to be assigned to low A Carolina, where he will be 17 years old and about 10 months. So almost certainly going to be the youngest player at the level. He will be about 2 months ahead of the timeline that Jackson Churio was on. Well, honestly, more like 3 months, because Churio didn't make the opening day roster, and he's also about 2 months ahead of Made in terms of age, not counting in years, obviously, but just in months. Um, so Made will be one of the youngest players and one of the younger Brewers to ever debut in low A, especially on the opening day roster. And there's been some video coming out from multiple sources of him hitting some homers and in the minor league spring training games. And I mean, the swing is just It's so quick. It looks so good. I'm going to be very curious if at some point we end up getting any sort of swing metrics on his bat speed. I know when Churio was in low A, there was at times some people got their hands on some swing metrics. So I'm hoping we get the same with Made, but that one is basically official. The other one that I think is kind of up in the air is Luis Pena, the other DSL, the other biggest DSL performer last year. There was a Fangraphs chat with Eric Longenhagen. He was asked about Pena and Made. First of all, saying that he loves both of them and that the Brewers actually view Pena almost as highly as Made internally. And then he also kind of slipped in that it sounds like they're both going to be assigned to low A. So most likely that is going to be the middle infield, or at least middle infield slash third base the majority of the time for low A Carolina to start the year. Pretty fun. It sounds like from what Longenhagen said, two guys that might be legitimate stars, but one of them, Made, right now definitely takes the lead in terms of prospect stardom at this moment. Very fun players to watch, and I'm very much looking forward to being able to watch them on minor league baseball TV. The other bit of true roster assignment news that we have right now, Jefferson Cairo is going to be starting in AA. He was in AAA last year to start the season, got hurt on the very first play, basically, of the season and missed all of the rest of it. He's going to be in AA because he is, at this moment, still a DH only. He's not catching in games. So for Nashville, you think about a guy who Tyler Black got sent down, Ernesto Martinez is likely starting in Nashville. They're going to have to use that DH spot to make sure everybody's getting playing time. Biloxi, that DH spot is a little bit more open right now. So you send Cairo down there, let him get every day at bats as the DH. Don't take away from at bats for guys who kind of need to be ready to potentially come up to the big leagues at the DH spot in Nashville. And I think once he's catching, he will end up back in AAA pretty regularly. But I think it is kind of a good idea to point out, too, that at the beginning of spring, Murph had said that their goal, and they kind of expected him to be catching games by the end of spring training in Cactus League games. The fact he's not there, I'm not saying it's a setback by any means, but it does mean that he's a little bit behind the timeline that they were at least hoping to see from him. So I will be very curious to see how long it is before he ends up catching. And at that point, then it's going to be laser locked on the arm and seeing how he's looking in terms of throwing the ball. But if he gets back to where he was, I still maintain Cairo is going to be one of the better catchers in baseball at his peak, because the arm and the glove will carry him pretty far, and the bat's more advanced than most young catchers. The other bit of news, Braylon Payne played in a minor league spring training game today, Thursday. He'd been out since the spring breakout game. He was dealing with some tightness. He was thought to be playing in the breakout game and ended up having to be kind of a late scratch. Jose Anderson, of course, took his spot and then ended up hitting a homer in that game. So took advantage of his opportunity, another DSL performer. But good to see Payne back in. It was kind of getting a little questionable when it had been, a week and a half or so, and he hadn't been in any of the minor league lineups. Looks like he should be fine now and should be ready to go on minor league opening day for the Mudcats. I would expect him to be in low A to start the year. And then we'll finish this one off with my last two underrated prospects that I'm going to do before the season starts. I'm sure there'll be some pop-ups. I am starting to run out of names that I feel like I haven't already talked about a lot. So these are a little bit more deep cut. And honestly, one of them is more based on just a couple of quick looks because he was injured all of last year. But my first one is Tyler Bryant. He pitched in the final spring training game for the Brewers against the Rockies. Relief pitcher, very animated guy on the mound, not like Abner Uribe animated, but he's just kind of like jittery. You can tell he's just kind of antsy on the mound at all times. But he's got a pretty fun fastball. We've seen him up to 99 in the minors. He got almost up to 99 in this outing. I think he had 98 point something. Very flat vertical approach angle. We talked about Freddy he was about negative 4.2 today. In Bryant's spring training outings, he was at negative 3.8. He comes from a very, very low release height, but he does get decent extension, about 6.5 feet. And it's a fastball that really seems to get on guys. In the minors, especially, they struggled with it. I think we're going to see him in Double-A to start the year, but he also has 2 breaking balls. He throws a slider. He throws a curveball. Velo-wise, they're very similar, but in terms of the movement, there's quite a bit of a difference in there. He gets a lot more drop on the curveball, and even he gets more sweep on it too, although I'd say the curveball shape is a little less consistent than the slider has been. At times getting more sweep, at times being more 12-6 almost. So it'll be interesting to watch him this year. I tweeted this, but the stuff he has, the way he throws, kind of it's a little herky jerky, the delivery, which I think helps some of the stuff play up. If there was going to be somebody that nobody was expecting at all to pitch in a major league game this year to do it in the Brewers system, I think that would be my choice. If I was going like deep, dark horse, sneaky, all of a sudden in September, Tyler Bryant's throwing innings in the Brewers bullpen, I think I could see that. I think there's a world where I could see that happening. So he's an interesting one. Will be very fun to watch. He even has a little bit of like the young Corbin Burns look because he wears the kind of the rec specs and he has similar hair to Corbin Burns, but it's different stuff. He just looks like him in terms of physical build and everything else. And then my second one on the offensive side is Demetrio Nadal. So he missed all of 2024. He had been assigned to the Arizona Complex League. He'd been in DSL before in 2023. I don't know what the injury was in 2024, but we did see him in big league spring training a couple times this year. Pretty small dude. Last time we saw him, he had a 167 WRC plus in the DSL, hit a couple of homers, 5 triples, 6 doubles, strikeout rate of only 12% with a walk rate over 15%. And the thing that stood out to me is that, one, I like his swing. I think he's got a pretty quick swing. But watching him in the big league infield, he kind of stood out in terms of like not standing out. He looked the part of a shortstop at even playing amongst other big leaguers. He made some really nice plays in the hole for his size. Small dude. He looked like he had a pretty good arm to me. I didn't know anything about his defense coming in. I think he had some error issues in the DSL. Nothing crazy, but he looked the part to me defensively. And the fact that he hit that well last time we saw him, I would imagine he's got a shot to be at Carolina. He's probably more likely to start in the ACL, but he's going to be one I'm keeping an eye on because there's not a ton on him, but it just pure eye test. He caught my eye with the swing and with the defense, so I'll be paying close attention to him. But Tyler Bryant, Demetrio Nadal, those are my 2 final picks. Like I said, I'm sure I'll bring up some other ones as the season starts, but hopefully I gave you guys some fun names to keep an eye on as we get into the season, which Nashville starts tomorrow, meaning the day this is coming out. And then next week, we will have the other 3 affiliates getting going, and we'll get all the other rosters and everything else at that point. But this is my time of year. This is opening day for the Brewers. I got 4 minor league teams that I'll get to pay attention to soon. I got a baseball team that I'm coaching. It's all baseball all the time, and that's what I love. So, yeah, I'm pumped. Jack, you can jump back in and wrap this up. But, yeah, now just talking about that, I got even more excited for baseball season.
All baseball except for when you're at your day job.
Yeah, well, I still do a lot of baseball there, but that's okay.
Sometimes baseball at the day job. That's okay. That's going to do it for us this week on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. I'm also happy that opening day is back. Just being able to watch like a broadcast again today, I think it just kind of reminds you how much you missed not only like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, but like even just the little things, whether it's, Bill Schroeder saying nice piece of hitting when someone went the other way and we kind of goad him for that a little bit, like just things like that. You miss some of that stuff. So it's good to have it all back now. Should be a fun year ahead for all of us. So thank you all for tuning in. Plenty more from us coming this season. Thank you to everyone who turned in questions, all that good stuff. We'll be back with you next week, inevitably with some new storylines and some new stuff to go over. So you will hear from us again next Friday.